Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for being here and being at our first ever, to my knowledge, North House evening public program webinar. My name is Jessa Frost. I'm the program director at North House, and I'm coming to you from my house in Tofte, Minnesota tonight because, of course, North House is closed, like most places in Minnesota, as part of the stay-at-home order from the government. And so it is pretty heartbreaking to be closed when we're a place that's all about enriching lives and building community. But since that closure went into effect in mid-March, we have been doing our utmost to be as creative as possible with the tools that we have at hand, which is the very nature of craft, is use what you've got to make stuff. And so the tools that are at hand for building community right now and teaching about traditional craft are Zoom and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and a blog. And so we've launched an initiative called Crafting in Place. And we pretty much every day of the week try to bring content to all of those different channels that celebrates the work of the more than 200 artists that we work with, that celebrates the work of our students, and that is affirming and positive in what feels like a challenging world right now. So tonight's program is a really fun one. We are delighted to have Mark and Katya Gordon here. Before we leap into their presentation, I want to just tell you a few technical things for those of you who are attending your first Zoom webinar. Zoom webinar is a slightly different format than you may have had if you have been to like a Zoom happy hour or a Zoom family meeting where there's a bunch of little heads up there. You're just going to see our heads, but we still really hope that you will participate. And so some thoughts about how you can do that are at the very bottom of your screen. There should be a couple of options. There's a button that says chat, button that says raise hand, and a button that says Q&A. And you can use any of those buttons to communicate with us during the presentation tonight. If you're on a smartphone or a tablet, you might have to tap the screen to get the little bar to show up. If you have questions during the webinar, you can type them into the Q&A section and we will answer them as we go. Or if you prefer to speak live, your image won't come up, but your voice will. Click raise your hand and I'll turn on your microphone and you can ask your question directly. So feel free to ask a question in the Q&A section or raise your hand at any time, but we'll probably wait until the questions sections to address those. You can also use the chat window to send messages to all of the attendees here at the webinar. There's, I can't quite see right now, but nearly 20 of us, or just to the panelists, myself and Mark and Katya. So that is the scoop on how things work tonight. Our plan is that Mark and Katya are going to talk to you a little bit about who they are and what they do. We're going to show some video and then we'll take some questions. So that's the plan for the evening. This is, as I said, our very first time using this format at a public event. So my fingers are very much crossed that the technology is going to be with us. But if anything is unclear or is giving you trouble, please feel free to let us know and we'll do our best to address it for you. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Mark and Katya Gordon here. I'll let them explain more about their work, but Mark and Katya have been involved with North House Folk School for more than a decade and have been pioneering our curriculum on the world's largest inland sea, which happens to be the front yard of North House. And so every season they are taking students out for immersive trips on Lake Superior. As many of you might know, North House has a schooner of our own, the schooner Yordis. And schooner Yordis takes people out all summer long too, but it is primarily on short trips. The folks who really get to spend time on the big lake do it with Mark and Katya on their boat Amicus. So thanks so much for being here and we can't wait to hear more from you.
All right. Can you hear us?
All right. Well, this is a new one for us too. And so we're just going to quick introduce ourselves. I'm Mark.
And I'm Katya. Our daughters are here too. They've been sailing with us forever, and there they are on the sides. It's hard for us to all fit. Hope you can see us.
Yep. So, well, we can maybe start by just giving a little bit of history of our sailing, and then what we have is we want to give you a tour of our boat Amicus 2, which is a 40-foot steel cutter that we use. It's the big red sailboat that you see tied up at the dock every now and then up at North House, and then give you a chance to. So it's a video tour, and then we'll give you a chance to ask some questions, and we want to finish it off with kind of a fun short video, 3-minute video that we put together with various clips of us sailing around on the lake.
With lots of other people.
Yeah. So let's see. Our story really begins about 20 years ago. We bought, Katya and I, when we first got married, we bought a boat called Amicus 1, and it was a 34-foot steel cutter. And our dream was to kind of fix that boat up and take it sailing. And so we kind of developed this 5-year plan. And in the meantime, we had our 2 daughters came along, and in 2006, well, actually in 2005, we did a test run on the lake. We circumnavigated Lake Superior, and when the girls were, Lamar, I don't think was even a year old, and Cedar was around 2. And that was a very, very challenging trip. It was about 1,200 miles to sail all the way around the lake. And we really got our feet wet, so to speak, with that, and found out that the cruising life wasn't all just sunset, sitting in the cockpit, drinking a cup of tea or something like that. There were a lot of challenges to it, and to this day, we feel like it was one of the most challenging trips that we've ever done. But it did set us up and it really did whet our appetite for more adventures. And so the next year, we quit our jobs in April, and we sold our house and put a lot of our stuff in storage, and we took off on a year-long trip. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, Katya.
Sure. So our first trip, our kids were 1 and 3 when we left, 3 and 5 when we got back. We sailed to the Bahamas and back, and it was just about a year. And it was definitely the trip that sort of formed us as a family, who we are, what our priorities are. And when we got back, we moved to 2 Harbors, where we live today, and began our business called Amicus Adventure Sailing, which included buying a bigger boat. And so the boat you see today is Amicus 2. It's a 40-foot steel cutter rig, and we took one more trip to the Bahamas on that boat, and we have done a lot of sailing on Lake Superior since then. I think we can probably leave it at that. We would love to take you if you're a potential someone who would be interested. So
yeah, along the way, we started another program too. So we have our regular sailing business, Amicus Adventure Sailing, but then we also have a nonprofit called Sea Change Expeditions, and that is well, in 2012 and 13, we took another year-long trip in our current boat, again from the Great Lakes down to the Bahamas, and spent the year on the boat. And then during that trip, we really started to be affected by climate change a lot. In fact, we got caught in Hurricane Sandy, which at the time in 2012 was the biggest hurricane ever recorded. And we weathered that just fine at anchor up a river in North Carolina, but it really changed things for us after that, because we started to see a lot of the destruction of climate change and how it was really impacting a lot of the coastal communities. And so we came back, started doing a little research, and found out that, it's really impacting Lake Superior a lot too. So then we started this program called Sea Change Expeditions, and we're going into, I believe, our 8th year now, and we do climate change education programming around the lake, anywhere from a 30-day trip with college students going to different schools around the lake via our sailboat in May, and we have a 10-day teen trip, and I know there's at least one young woman who is going to be joining us, who is watching this, Brooke.
Hello, Brooke.
And hopefully, anyway, in June, we're still at the end of June, we're still planning to do that. And then we have an educators trip as well that we do. So we have kind of two different things. And then in the meantime, we just love to be out on the boat, and we do a lot of day sails and that kind of thing as well. So that's kind of a nutshell version. You know, we've sailed probably over 15,000 miles, 20,000 miles on Lake Superior, and have really gotten to know that lake very well. And we can't think of a better place to sail out of anywhere we sailed our boat. So
I see there's a couple Q&A. Should we talk about that before we show the video, or should we show the video?
yeah, let's hit that right now, maybe.
Oh, yes, we do run the sea change. Oh, so yes, actually one of the participants here has a son coming with us also.
Yes. Hello, Ethan.
Hi, Ethan. Awesome. That's really fun. So we have 2 teenagers coming with us on this very seminar. How exciting. I don't think either one of you have ever seen our boat, so this will be your little preview.
Yeah. All right. So maybe what we'll do is we're going to show the video. It's about 10 minutes long, and it gives you kind of a tour of the inside of the boat to see what it's like to be on the inside of a 40-foot sailboat, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. So I don't know, Jessa, and the quality is okay, but with the internet connections and stuff, it's not going to be like super crisp, but you'll definitely get the idea. So we're ready for that.
Yep, and cue up the video. For folks, I will put the URL for the video into the chat, which you'll all be able to see. So if you want to watch it again on your own, in case it gives you pixelated views or anything like that, you can do that. So here we go.
Hi, my name's Mark Gordon. I'm captain of the Amicus 2, and welcome aboard our boat. We're going to give you a little virtual tour of our sailboat so you can get an idea of what it's like down below here. So we're going to start right up here, and this is called the V-berth, this area. If you look way up there, we have 300 feet of chain behind that curtain up there for anchoring, and then our bed up here. And this is typically where Katya and I live. That's our sleeping quarters and our kind of private space up there. We often have crew on board, and when you come on board the Amicus 2, everyone's issued one of these baskets right here. And so we give you a packing list, and if you follow it, just about everything you bring on board is going to fit right in that basket, believe it or not. And then you also get a little cubby back here. You can see behind every cushion and under every cushion there's tons of storage that we use for all kinds of different things. Here we have our diesel heater, and which is really nice for early season sailing. We do a lot of sailing in May and June when the lake temperatures are in the 30s, and so it's really nice to be able to be out in the cold conditions all day, and then anchor up at night and turn that baby on. It gets 70 degrees in here really fast, and it's just really nice and cozy. Of course, everybody always wonders what's the bathroom situation like. Well, I gotta tell you, there's no shower on board this boat, but we do have a bathroom right in here, and the signature piece of our bathroom is our composting toilet. And we've had a composting toilet for over 20 years now in our various boats, and we couldn't be happier with it. One of the biggest limitations for cruising on Lake Superior is how far you can go away from a dock if you have a holding tank, which is about 3 days. And of course, we travel sometimes 30 days without going into a dock. And so with a composting toilet, we can be out indefinitely and not have to worry about pump outs or finding a place to empty out our holding tank. So we're really big fans of the composting toilet.
Hi, I am Katya Gordon. I'm Mark's wife, and I am first mate on the Amicus 2, and I'm going to show you about our living area. We have a saying here, which is that you need to eat, you need to sleep, and you need to live, but you don't need to do all those things at once. And this area is really the center of our home here, and it is where we do all three of those things at different times of the day. I'll start with the living part. This is we call it the salon area, but it is also where people sit down to read or draw or play games or drink their tea or work. You know, this really is the hub of our living area. There's lots of games back there. There's lots of books in our library. And so this is really everyone's space during the day. And you can see it is also where we eat our meals. We have an extension right here to pull out. And with that, we can really feed a lot of people. We've had 10, 12, 15 people here for a meal, and we have served hundreds of meals and really thousands of meals and hundreds of people right here at this table. So this is one of our favorite spots. On this side, we have a single berth, and it's also called a single bunk, and there's a leak cloth. And we have leak cloths all over the boat for people. This is in case you want to lie down or sleep when the boat is moving, which might be during the night, but it also could be during the day. People take naps. And you see how once you strap this in, you're not going to fall out. So these leak cloths are, like I said, throughout the boat. These are our wicker baskets, we call them, and they just store a lot of different foods. We have cans, fresh produce. We have one devoted entirely to eggs. We bring up to 30 dozen eggs at a time on our longer trips, so we need lots of space for storage and for eggs.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our navigation station here. So whenever we're underway, we're going to have a chart on this table right here. And one of the really neat things about Amicus 2, it actually has a full-size chart table. So you can put out a full chart on here. A lot of your newer boats, because people use electronic navigation primarily, they just have chart tables that will fit like a laptop, and that's it, because most people now navigate off of their laptop or their iPad or their iPhone or something like that. And we're kind of old school here on Amicus 2, so we do all of our navigation primarily with paper charts, and we teach a lot of classes on that. It's becoming a lost art, but so whenever we're underway, you're going to see a chart out here, you're going to see charting tools, you're going to see our log out here, and we update our log about every 2 hours at least, depending upon what type of area we're going through. Sometimes we'll update it more frequently than that. When we look at our station up here, we have a couple different things. We do have a GPS that we use. Again, more as a backup for our paper charts, but we do have actually a couple of them on board. We have VHF radio here, and primarily we're using that to talk to other boats. And what's really critical on this lake is to have something that you can...
Now here is the hazardous weather outlook for portions of northeast Minnesota and northwest Wisconsin.
So we pay attention to that hazardous weather outlook, let me tell you. We have different switches over here for lights and the different instrumentation. We have backup VHF radios. We have several on board that we use, like out at the helm station and that sort of thing. We have lots of paper charts on board. We'll have storage under here for paper charts. And I'm going to show you a little diagram here of Amicus 2 to give you an idea. This is what Amicus 2 looks like underneath the water. So right now, if we were floating from about my knees down, we would be underwater. And one of the reasons this boat does not tip over, even in a real strong wind, is it has 10,000 pounds of ballast about 5 feet under the water. And then it has different tanks for the different fluids. We carry about 100 gallons of water in two 50-gallon tanks, and then we have a 50-gallon fuel tank down under the floorboards, and we also have another fuel tank up above, sort of inside the cockpit area there. So that's kind of what it looks like. It's called a full keel. It goes all the way back to the rudder here, and then this would be part of our wind vane steering system back here. All right. Now, underneath the chart table, we also have stuff that involves the galley. So we have, we can lift this up, and we have a refrigerator that we have under here, and then we have more food storage underneath the charts right here. So there's, again, just tons of storage on this boat, and it's really built for long-range cruising.
Welcome to the galley, as a kitchen is called on a boat. I'm going to show you first our 2 sinks and our water sources. We have 2 sinks, and each sink has a different water source. This water is pumped in from here, and this is outside water, so this comes from the lake, and we use it for dishwashing and other things, not for drinking, but it greatly increases the length that we can stay out because we don't have to refill our water tanks very often. This is our inside water, so this water comes from the tanks under the floorboards, and it also is pumped in. No electronics. We do our fruits and vegetables here. People put their sunglasses in here. This is kind of just a catch-all. And then as I'm turning around here, this is where we keep our spices. We have a 2-burner stove, and we often have 7 or 8 people on board, and we don't make a lot of processed foods or ready-made foods, so we do a lot of cooking on this stove. We have big pots down there. We have an oven right here that I make bread in. And this stove gimbals, which means it rocks. We have a setting under here which can get it rocking so that when we're sailing and it's rousting, we can still cook without having pots tip and water spill. Down in here is a lot of our dish towels, and we have a griddle here. All these, of course, are just full of things. We have pans and bowls in here. Lots of dry goods are stored here. Beans, rice, lentils, all that good stuff. Down here we have our leftover containers, more pots and pans. We even carry things like a tortilla maker and coffee pot. So we get pretty fancy sometimes. It's not like camping bare bones wise. Here's where we keep all our teas and hot chocolates and special teas that people bring. And all the doors open and close, and they have a clicker so that you can't open them easily, so that if we're tipping, they don't open automatically. Back here we have plates, bowls. Everything is very economical. All the water bottles get stored along here. And altogether, it's a very small space, but it holds a lot.
All right, I'm going to finish up the tour by showing you kind of the aft end of the cabin here. And the 2 main things we have back here are what we call our quarter berths. And this side is typically where our daughter Lamar would sleep. This side is Cedar's berth. And then they are also available for crew on a lot of our trips as well. A couple other things we have back here are we have our radar screen, lots of fire extinguishers on board. I think we have 5 or 6 of those. Those are very important. And then we have this thing here called an EPIRB, and it's a little satellite beacon that we can use if we're in trouble and there's no other way to get a hold of the Coast Guard. We can set that off and they'll know exactly where we are. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the tour, and please stay tuned though, because now we have just a short clip on what it's like to sail the boat on the outside of the boat and get the feel of what it's like to be out on the lake.
Whoop.
All right, there we are. I don't know if that generated any questions. I see there's maybe a couple. Did we already look at those?
Yeah. Can you hear us?
I can't. Let's see. I think you guys should be back in just fine. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Monica. She can hear us. All right. So we had a couple questions. One was, Monica had a question. Do we have to balance the items on the boat for even weight? Good question.
Yeah.
I'll let Mark answer.
Well, Sort of yes and no. First of all, the boat itself, without anything on it, weighs almost 30,000 pounds. So it is very heavy and stable in the water. And so in other words, if you're on the dock and you step up onto the deck to get onto the boat, it barely even moves. And it takes about 1,200 pounds to lower the boat like maybe a half to 3/4 of an inch into the water. It's called a heavy displacement boat. So it takes a lot of weight to start to bring the boat down further into the water. And so, you know, if we're just going out for a 10-day trip or something like that, we don't really even pay attention to where we put the weight. If we're going to be out for a year, or you know, we're going to have 8 people on board for 30 days, then we're talking, you know, 1,000 pounds worth of food alone. And so we'll have, you know, some thought as to where we put the food and try to even it out. So like, you know, the house battery system is on the port side, and on the starboard side we have, because that's very heavy, and then I have tools on the port side or whatever to balance that out. So we do, some thought goes into that, but it's definitely not like a kayak or you know, a little day sailor where the thing wobbles around when you get onto it. So it's really quite stable in that respect.
Yeah, one thing we really love about our boat is that it is, you can strap everything down. I mean, everything is just really stable. Sometimes with boats, when they really rock, you know, books will fall out and clothes will fall out and food and cans. And Amicus 2 is really made for the sea. And Mark even added to that by putting bungees everywhere. There's a couple weak spots though. There was one time we were out on the Atlantic, and we had Dennis, who was a lifelong sailor, sailed around the world, and just someone who was really a privilege to have with us. He was sailing with us on a lake to Charleston, and it was very raucous, and it was the middle of the night, and he was down on the double settee, and all the homeschooling books came crashing down on him from the very top shelf there, which really hardly ever happens. But luckily he thought it was hilarious, actually. So, but it is a wonderful boat for weight and for stability and for storing a lot of stuff and having it stay stored when you're actually moving.
You know, another question that we often get is, do you ever get seasick? And that is something that does happen to a lot of people at some point. You know, any seasoned sailor will say, if they're ever asked, do you ever get seasick? And if they haven't ever been seasick, they'll say not yet. So just about everybody gets a little seasick at times. Some people get a lot more, and you know, at a certain degree, I mean, it just kind of comes with the territory. And we could regale you with seasick stories for hours. The girls have experienced, I don't know if you guys want to talk about that at all, but they've experienced seasickness quite a lot, as well as Katya, and I've gotten queasy a few times over the years. But it's certainly not something that has ever discouraged us from, you know, from getting back out even after a bad day. So,
Lamar, Cedar, you want to talk about seasickness at all?
I'd say you get used to it.
Here, move in a little bit.
You get used to it very quickly, and it just kind of, yeah, it kind of becomes part of the territory.
Cedar, do you have anything to add? Speak loud.
You also grow out of it too. Like younger
yeah.
kids tend to get a lot more seasick than older people or adults typically.
We found both girls had a terribly seasick stage around 9, 10, 11, and then it kind of fizzled out.
in fact, we were on one passage down the East Coast, heading from North Carolina down to, we were hoping to get to Cape Canaveral, and but it would normally take 3 or 4 days, and a couple days into it, Cedar for some reason just got really seasick, and to the point where she had thrown up like 20 times or something, and we actually diverted to go into Beaufort St. Augustine, about 100 miles short of Cape Canaveral, just because we were so concerned that she was getting dehydrated. But
which is a whole nother story in itself. This was right after Hurricane Sandy, and the buoys were all in the wrong places. So we actually had to go in and come out again into these 12-foot waves while poor Cedar was like, never mind. We don't need to tell anymore.
And our biggest concern actually after that was whether or not she would ever agree to go back out on the ocean. But she did, and she has sailed thousands of miles since then.
And has never been nearly that seasick.
Yeah, I think that was the last time she got that seasick.
All right, there's more questions. One is, where do we spend winters? Where is the boat stored? So we have a house in Two Harbors. And so after our second trip, we, here. Ooh, sorry. I'm trying to get the questions. So after our second trip, we moved into a house. After the first trip, we moved into a house, which we've lived in ever since. So we spend a lot of the day, a lot of the year, May to September on the boat. Mark spends every day on the boat. The girls and I are on May and June mostly, and then the winter we're in. And the boat's at Knife River, which is just north of Duluth, at a marina. And we actually just received word today that even though the marina is closed, we can get our boat in the water. So we're very excited about that. All right. One other question for Cedar and Lamar. How has this experience affected you? That's a good one.
I go first. So it's definitely given me a passion for traveling. Having traveled since a very young age on the boat. It's also given me a pretty big appreciation for like water and how like useful it is, and like the need to protect it because it's very special, especially Lake Superior. Yeah.
I think it puts a lot of things in perspective. Like it makes living in a house seem very large and luxurious, and yeah, you just appreciate things a lot more, and you appreciate like your surroundings a lot more, I think.
Nice. This is fun. Any more questions? Let's see. I think, oh, there is another question. What do you do about laundry and bathing? Good question. So there is a 5-gallon bucket. That's the short answer. So generally when we go on a trip, it's a long trip, we have the 5-gallon bucket and we use it to soak clothes. Most of washing is soaking. We do have some very earth-friendly soap that we can use, but often it's just soaking it in a long time in a moving boat that sloshes and then drying it out. So that's what we do on anything. Now, on our year-long trips, we would do the same thing, but occasionally we would also stop at laundromats. But that was pretty rare. I mean, we didn't really need to. Generally, we just use the bucket.
And I remember coming back from our first year-long trip. We had been in the Bahamas all winter, and we came into Florida, and the first real, we wanted to go to a library right away because we had run out of books. And so anyway, we walked into the library, and the kids sat down at a table with a bunch of other little kids, and we suddenly realized how sort of dingy all of our clothes were compared to everybody else's, because we'd just been washing them in a bucket, all winter. So you can always pick out a cruiser a mile away just because of their dingy clothes if they've been living on their sailboat for a while. But anyway, and then as far as the bathing part of it goes, the neat thing about especially Lake Superior is it's fresh water, and so your bath is only a 3-foot jump away typically. And so even in our May trips, when the water temperature is typically in the 30s, and back in the bays it might be in the 40s, we're jumping in almost every day. In fact, Cedar and Lamar will take the dip a day challenge often, and where they're going to jump in every day just because it's a personal challenge.
The May trip is with university age students who are very intrepid. Not everyone could do that, but the teenagers in June also get really into jumping in every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most adults jump in at some point too. We also have a solar shower, so we have a sort of like a black bag that we can heat up on the cabin top, and then you can rig it up and take a little shower. We rarely do that on Lake Superior, though. We mostly just do that when we sail to the Bahamas or go far away onto saltwater. Many of these adventures, by the way, are chronicled. I did write a book. It's called Big Waves, Small Boat, Two Kids, if anyone's interested. I know North House sells it, and you can find it elsewhere too. Do your children spend part of the year on board at the school year and partly at Two Harbors? How does that work out for everyone? Good question. The short answer, and anyone can add on to this, is we actually homeschooled for a long time. So that really enabled us to do whatever. And that's when we had both our years aboard, but also time in Two Harbors was spent homeschooling. And that ended for the girls, so 2 or 4 years ago. We've kind of gradually merged into school. So now they're in school, and the last few years they have actually, lucky for us, they're really good students, and they have, the teachers have been incredibly supportive, and they've essentially done their work ahead of time or on the boat. And their teachers have often made their work be something about the boat. We have a lot of support from our community on what we do, and we're very lucky that way. Anyone want to add anything?
Well, just to be clear, what like at the on our May trip, they often miss like the last 5 weeks of school, and that's where they do their work ahead of time and get special assignments and that sort of thing. So that's still a big part of the trips.
Do you have any girls? Do you want to just comment on what it's like to sort of having homeschooled and now do school, like the transition and doing school on a boat? I mean, this is.
I'd say like we're really lucky. Our teachers have been really supportive. So they don't have any problems with us just like leaving for a month at the end of the year, and they'll just give us some assignment that we can do on the boat. And yeah, they've just been really nice about it. So it's never really caused any problems for us.
And Cedar?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay.
And then, I mean, you talk about an education, just being out there sailing every day, and that May trip, they are helping to present our Sea Change program, sometimes standing in front of 300 kids in a school auditorium. So it's really quite an experience.
Yeah, it's not a hard sell that it's very educational. Yeah. The next question is, what's our favorite and least favorite meal to cook? So because you're asking about the cook, I'll answer first, although I will say that everybody in this family cooks at that little stove. But I don't know. My favorite is probably the simplest. We do so many one-pot meals. You can really, it's hard to do something different than a one-pot meal. What would you say? What?
Pierogies.
Oh, pierogies. So we had a student from Lakehead last year who introduced us to pierogies, and she made hundreds of them. Little potato balls, cheese balls. We really get into beans and rice. We add cheese, olives. We can our own meat and a lot of vegetables and potatoes and carrots and onions. I'm pretty boring when I'm talking about it, but I think the food is, people generally love the food. I'll say that. It's wholesome food, and some years people get really into ketchup, or some years they get really into mustard. We start to have condiments mean a lot. We had a ton of eggs. We usually eat about a dozen eggs a day. So we bring 30 dozen eggs on our 30-day trip. Anyone want to add their favorite meal?
Also your least favorite meal too.
Oh, my least favorite meal. Oh, I don't know. There's a lot of questions. My goodness. Anyone have a least favorite meal? People aren't complainers. The wonderful people that come on our boat, including the young adults, like they just set this tone that I'm sure have the girls also set it. Like, it's just not a complaining tone. So people just don't complain. I don't know what people don't like.
Well, I think the big thing with the food too is that we just have a lot of it.
Yes.
Because especially on our May trips when it's so cold, you need a lot of calories, and we usually have 4 college students on board who just eat a lot of food, and so I don't know how she does it, but I'll tell you what, you crank out 3 full meals a day for 8 people on that little stove down there, and the meals are just fabulous every time. And so she should write a book on it.
Well, one thing is you just always say 2 meals ahead. So any morning, I know what's going to be for lunch and dinner. There's beans soaking. There's something soaking all the time. I definitely have methods.
And it's not like, try to picture this cooking up, a big spaghetti dinner or something like that in your kitchen for 8 people. I mean, that's kind of hard to begin with. Now try doing it at like a 30-degree angle where you have to always be holding on with one hand, and then, sticking your head out the hatch every couple of minutes so you don't throw up while you're doing it. So it's to me, that's the hardest job on the boat. I mean, it brings me to my knees. When I do the 10-day fall Isle Royal trips, my biggest stress of the whole thing is the meals and making sure that we have enough food, because Katya isn't on that trip with me, and so
but the food is still pretty good by all reports.
Yeah. All right, let's move on.
All right, storms, dangerous events, storms, leaks, falls overboard. Yes, people always want to know that.
Okay, well, I'll just talk about that a little bit. So here's the thing. When you talk to a sailor with a lot of hairball, falling overboard, running up on the reef kind of stories, they're probably not that great of a sailor. But so one thing that we realized right away, 20 years ago, our sailing adventures, when it was just Katya and I, would be a little bit maybe more intrepid. And then when we had our kids, the whole thing changed, and so we're very conservative on the kind of weather we go out in. And luckily, we have a really incredibly seaworthy boat that can sail any ocean in the world. So we're often out there in conditions that most people wouldn't want to go out in, but even still, we pay close attention to the weather, and we put a lot of effort into not getting ourselves into stressful, stormy kind of situations. And we know, what our abilities are, we know what the boat can handle. And so we just, we plan accordingly. And so because of that, we don't have a lot of sort of like death-defying stories, I mean, we've definitely been in some pretty big waves and pretty strong winds, but most of it was, we were out there because we knew it was coming and it was within our abilities and that sort of thing. And so
I'd say there's been a lot of situations where Mark and I our stomach is turning because it's a little nerve-wracking, but the girls always seem completely fine with it. So they never seem nervous at all. Even when, there's been a few times when there's been storm, like lightning and thunder, hail warnings, even water spout, and we were like, ooh. And we get everything ready, and we even put up the trysail, which is like our storm sail, and get all our gear on. And we've never really had a terrible direct hit like that, except maybe the one time when Theodore was a little baby, and right by our house, right by home actually. And even that was short-lived. We just motored into it, kind of peeing in our pants, but it was okay.
We did have an interesting situation on a North House trip, actually. Our North House trip that went from North House down to Knife River. We do that trip a couple times a year, and the last day we were heading across. We were about 10 miles offshore, halfway across from Port Wing to Knife River, and we had suddenly a marine warning came out that there was this huge storm coming right up the lake, and that they're telling everybody to go duck for cover. Well, we couldn't do that because we were out in the middle of the lake. And so, but we had plenty of time. We had probably about 15, 20 minutes before it hit. You could see it coming up the lake. And, but we took it as a learning experience, and we quickly got out what's called the trysail. It's a special kind of storm sail. We had the participants out there helping us put it up. And then we got all ready. We waited for it, and suddenly it got very dark, and the fog rolled in ahead of it, and it was, you could hear the boomers coming. It was very ominous. And then all of a sudden this 40-knot wind hit us like a freight train. But we just heeled over a little bit, came back up. It hailed like crazy. But we filmed the whole thing, and it was on our Facebook for a while. And it was, we totally did it as a teaching moment for the crew on board. And we had someone behind the wheel until the hail got so bad they had to duck out of there. But and it was over in like 20 or 30 minutes, and then we went on with our day after that. And the thing that happened on that one that was a little unusual is on the starboard side of the boat, or actually the port side of the boat, where the storm hit us, the hail came down, ricocheted off the deck, and took out every one of the screens on our portholes. They all had holes in them from the ricocheting hail. But anyway, I had 100% confidence in the boat. I had 100% confidence in Katya and the crew, and so it was a kind of thing where we could have been really freaked out by that, but instead I think everyone on board just thought it was a great experience. So
yeah, and I will have just one quick addition is that Mark is very, very conscientious. I mean, everything in that boat is ship shape, and to do that is a lot of work. Like when things start to wear out, they get replaced, and you sometimes I think, wow, that's a lot of work. But then whenever we're out there and things are sketchy and there's just so much pressure on the sails, or you're just so glad that our boat is in such good shape taking it out there. And that's what it takes to get on Lake Superior safely, really.
I'm going to jump in. This is Jessa, and call on. We have a participant who wants to ask a question. Judy, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and you can ask your question.
That's me. I didn't realize I asked a question. I must have touched the phone wrong.
Oh, I'm sorry, you
That's
had your
okay.
hand up.
That's okay. It's just a delight to hear you and to see you. This is my first sail on Zoom, okay? Is anybody there a photographer? I imagine you see just incredible sights out there on the lake.
We do. We have 2 budding photographers. We've taken pictures throughout, of course, but I wouldn't call either one of Mark or I a talented photographer. We have taken many people that are amazing photographers, and we also did a trip with some Patagonia filmers, and there's a film called Great Lakes Bad Lines that we're in. So we keep thinking we should have better filming of ourselves, but we never do. But we have a sort of a haphazard approach. And
Thanks, Judy.
yeah, just a couple more quick questions. Jesse, you'll tell us if we should just make it short. Do we have to go through Canadian and US customs a lot when we go sailing around the lakes? Yes, we do. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, going into Canada is actually pretty easy because we get this thing called a remote border crossing permit, and so we can get one for our family when we do North House trips that go into Canada. Each person that goes as a participant, they apply for one of these. They're real easy to get, and so we can just sail right into Canadian waters without having to check in with customs if you have that permit. And so that makes it really easy, because otherwise you'd have to go into Thunder Bay without that, which is a big kind of a side trip. Thunder Bay is an awesome place to sail to, but it is kind of out of the way. And so we'll get that permit, cruise all over up there, and then when we come back, if it's all U.S. citizens on board, we like to land our first U.S. landfall on Isle Royal, because it's super easy to check in with customs on Isle Royal. We know all the rangers and stuff out there. And we can turn it into like a fun tour of Isle Royal while we're at it. Otherwise, we have to sail directly to, our boat has to sail pretty much directly to Grand Marais, because there really isn't a real good spot for us to stop. We can't pull in at Grand Portage Marina, we're too big. and there's another safe harbor that's pretty marginal for us. So we typically have to go to Grand Marais and then just wait for the customs. We'll call them ahead of time, and they'll typically meet us down there. But it's something that you definitely have to do. And you know, we've that's on Lake Superior. We've gone through customs on you know, most of the other Great Lakes too, and then of course down in the Bahamas. It's a whole different kind of experience. But that's really part of the fun though too.
Did we say we do charters for families? Yeah, we have taken quite a few families out on private charters. If you like, we have the North House trips, and we also have our trips through Amicus Adventure Sailing. So you can look up that website, and it just depends on our schedule. Like if you can find a time when we can take you. In fact, I know Roxanne Youngie, who's been out here, has been on 2 family charters. So nice to see you, Roxanne.
Yeah, yeah. So we absolutely do those kind of trips. Yeah.
And I think, Cedar and Lamar, what percentage of your lives do you think you've spent on the water?
For me, it's probably somewhere between 30% and 40%, I think. You know, up until I was probably about 5 or 6, it would be at least like 60 to 70% of my life was on the water. But now that I'm older and have a lot of connections to land life, so it's a little less.
Yeah, I think like it used to be a lot, probably like 50% maybe, and now it's more like 20% maybe. I don't know.
They started to have their own lives. Can you believe it?
That's a good question too, because for the first 3 years of Lamar's life, she lived on a boat more than she lived in a house. And so when we moved, we basically arrived here on a sailboat in Two Harbors, and lived on our sailboat in the marina for the first couple months after we arrived. And then we bought the house in Two Harbors, and
we had to do things like all go up the stairs together.
It was
all come down the stairs together, because we were just so unused to being that far apart that you couldn't even see the rest of the family. And a fridge was an amazing thing. A fridge, oh my goodness, it's still amazing to me sometimes. That door, it just fits so much stuff. I think all our questions are done. That was really fun. Thank you for asking those questions. I think, are we ready for our final video, Jessa?
Yep, I think so. Just a thank you to everybody for attending, and thank you to the whole Gordon family for participating. And yeah, North House puts out either a video or a Zoom webinar or an Instagram live session Monday through Friday. So the schedule is always on our homepage, which is northhouse.org. So there's lots more fascinating stories about people doing interesting things. So thanks so much for being part of it. And we're going to click over to a video.
Yep. And if you want to find out more about us, if you go to the North House website and just click on their instructors link, you can find us on there, and then from there you can get into our other websites and learn more about our Sea Change program and our Amicus Adventure Sailing.
Yeah, and we also, Mark teaches celestial navigation through North House, and we also do a winter river trip up one of the gorges, one of the rivers on Lake Superior in the winter through North House. So North House is an amazing place to go.
All right, thanks everybody. I'm going to go ahead and make this work.
And again, this video, you'll have the link to it. So if it's a little choppy, you can see a crisper one if you go directly to YouTube.
Going into Grand Marais, it's about 9 p.m. About 15-hour passage from Knife River.
Wake, Slate Island, May 17th, 2019.
Come me young one, come me fair one.
On May 13th, heading for Copper Harbor.
Good fancy, a poor sailor lad who has just come from
We're in the past, in winters in the past. You just knew that ice was going to be on her
Smell much of time, so be gone, you saucy sailor lad, so be gone, you jackdaw. If I am ragged love and I'm dirty love and be close, smell much of time, I am silver, I be lost.
As you guys know, we have this wonderful atmosphere surrounding her.
And then when she heard him say, so on a bended knee she fell, I will marry my dear Henry for a
Birdie watches.
You got it? Yep. Now we're in.
This side of the room, sit down. You guys are gonna sit down with me. So you can work that out. You can't access here. Quite yet there. Everybody in front of this teacher with flag.
Do you think that I am foolish love? Do you think that I am mad for to wed with a poor country girl where no fortunes to be had? I will cross the briny ocean, I will whistle and sing, and since you've refused the offer, love, some other girl should wear the ring. Oh, I am frolicsome and I am easy, good-tempered and free, and I don't give a single penny, boys, what the world thinks of me.
Anthony's the wheel, doing fantastic.
There you go.
Well, thanks to everybody. I'm going to go ahead and put the links for those in the chat. So if you hang out for just a minute, you'll be able to pull the link.
Everyone's still there. Anne is on there.